What if I told you that 90% of the hostility you encounter online today, like all the vitriol, the rage, the absolute toxicity, is actually being generated by a microscopic 1% of the people?
It really forces a complete reevaluation of how we interact with information, doesn't it?
Totally. And, what if I told you that these supposedly positive, feel-good news stories you watch on traditional television are actually built on this, like, invisible framework designed to subtly reinforce societal
Well,
division?
right, because we operate under this assumption that we are looking at the world objectively.
Yeah, we think we're just seeing things as they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whether we are, scrolling through a social media feed or watching the evening news or even just evaluating our own creative potential.
Yeah.
But beneath all of those activities are these structural landscapes that are hidden entirely from plain sight.
Yeah, we are living inside frameworks that basically dictate how we see the world, how we interact, how we create, and even how we process our own memories. And frequently, without ever realizing those frameworks were constructed for us in the first place.
Which is wild when you really think about it.
It is. And that is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. I am incredibly glad you were here with us, listening in, because the task today is massive. You're our third person in the room today as we expose those invisible structures.
We have a wildly eclectic stack of sources to pull from today,
Oh,
too.
we really do. We're starting with a deeply analytical academic paper by Faru Yilmaz. It's on how traditional media constructs the very concept of ethnic minorities in Denmark.
Right, and from there, we're going to look at a recent essay by Professor Michael Bang Petersen from Aarhus University. That one is all about the architecture of social media hostility.
Yes. And then we'll also examine a university extension catalog from Universiteit, which explores the science of creativity and trusted knowledge. And finally, we'll be looking at some course materials from Skolen for Hellingskunst, focusing on trauma therapy.
The through line connecting all these disparate sources is just undeniable. I
Yeah.
mean, whether it is a traditional evening news broadcast, a highly engineered digital algorithm, a school's rigid grading system,
Or even a frozen traumatic memory hidden deep in your own nervous system.
Exactly. Our minds are constantly being shaped, limited, and directed by these hidden structures.
So the goal is to turn on the black light, basically. Expose the glowing fingerprints all over our daily lives and figure out how to actually navigate them once we know they are there.
I love that analogy.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we want to understand how a digital algorithm shapes our anger today, we kind of have to look backward first.
Right. We have to look at how traditional media taught us to categorize people in the first place. This sets the baseline for literally everything that followed.
Which brings us directly to the research of Faru Yilmaz. And his paper completely upends the traditional methodology we use to critique the news.
It really does. Historically, media critics analyzing the portrayal of immigrants or ethnic minorities, they rely on this very straightforward quantitative approach.
Like counting things, basically.
Yeah, exactly. They look at a broadcast, they tally up the stories, and they categorize them as either positive or negative. The underlying assumption is that achieving a balance, or ideally a surplus of positive stories, solves the problem of misrepresentation.
I mean, I have to be honest, I struggle to see the flaw in that logic. On the surface, demanding more positive representation and less negative stereotyping seems like the exact right way to fix a biased media landscape.
It seems like the obvious solution, right?
Mhm.
But Yilmaz argues that this quantitative approach is actually a fundamental trap.
A trap? How so?
By focusing solely on whether a story is positive or negative, critics completely miss the invisible foundation that the entire debate is built upon.
Oh, I see.
He asserts that the media relies on a constructed binary. It's this unstated premise that society is naturally divided into two distinct opposing groups.
The us and them dynamic.
Exactly. Us representing the ethnic Danish majority and them representing ethnic minorities. He refers to this process as the ethnicization of the debate.
Wait, so the critique isn't about the tone of the story at all. It's about the fact that the story exists within an artificial us versus them box from the very moment the camera turns on.
Yes, that is perfectly stated. Let's look at the specific example Yilmaz pulls from a 1999 news broadcast because it perfectly illustrates this mechanism.
Okay, lay it on me.
The news segment was designed to be a classic, feel-good, positive story. It features a young girl with a Turkish background who is happily and successfully working in elder care in Jutland.
Sounds great so far.
Right. The journalist interviews an older Danish man, asking him if it's a problem having an immigrant as a home helper.
And what does he say?
The man replies that it isn't a problem at all, and he's very happy with her work. The journalist then wraps up the segment basically presenting this as definitive proof that immigrants gladly take the necessary jobs that Danes no longer want.
I mean, that is a total win for the minority community being portrayed, isn't it? It highlights integration, it shows a strong work ethic, cross-cultural harmony. I have to push back a little here. How can an objectively positive story like that be intrinsically harmful or flawed?
Well, Yilmaz asks us to look past the surface content and examine the invisible framework, specifically what he calls the burden
The
framing.
third in framing, okay.
Even this overwhelmingly positive story implicitly relies on a deep-seated, unstated premise. The premise is that immigrants are inherently a burden to society.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have caught that.
Right. This specific young girl is highlighted precisely because she is viewed as a positive exception to that unspoken rule. The underlying assumption that the audience had to accept just to engage with the conversation was the question, are immigrants a burden?
I see. So the positive story doesn't actually challenge the premise of the question. It merely argues, no, not this specific one.
Exactly. It validates the premise by participating in the debate on those specific terms.
That is a subtle but massive distinction. It reminds me of looking through a pair of tinted green sunglasses, and you're arguing intensely with someone about whether the landscape in front of you is pretty or ugly.
Yeah?
But you're completely ignoring the fact that you are both looking through artificial green lenses. You become so consumed by the debate over the content that you entirely forget about the frame dictating the terms of the debate.
That's a brilliant analogy. The debate is entirely constrained to the terms set by the green lenses. The media has already decided the parameters of the conversation before a single word is spoken.
It's manipulative, in a way, even if it's unintentional.
And Yilmaz delves deeply into how language itself solidifies these lenses. He specifically examines the etymology of the word ethnic.
Right. The text mentions the Greek word ethnos, doesn't it?
Yes, ethnos originally referred to peoples who had not adopted the Greek social and political system.
So it literally translated to the others.
Literally, it was a term explicitly designed for exclusion.
Yeah.
It defined a group not by what they were, but by what they were not. They were not Greek.
So when modern media utilizes the word ethnic to describe a portion of the population, they are unknowingly dragging centuries of exclusionary baggage right into the evening news broadcast.
Yes.
They are structurally defining a group of citizens as the others simply by using the accepted terminology of the day.
And this linguistic framework leads directly to what Yilmaz identifies as the essentialization of culture.
Break that down for me. What does essentialization look like in practice?
It basically creates a dual standard for analyzing human behavior. When an individual from the majority us commits an action, it is universally viewed as individual behavior.
Like an individual choice made by an autonomous person.
Exactly. However, when an individual from the constructed them group commits an action, it is immediately attributed to their perceived culture or ethnicity.
Right. There is a striking example of this essentialization in the text. An opinion piece is quoted where a specific immigrant's behavior is lumped into this giant homogenized cultural block.
Yeah, that quote is very telling.
The quote reads something like, "They build mosques and Islamic schools, but they chase blondes in the Scala Center with open grills and porn magazines."
It's intense.
It is. The author of that opinion piece takes individual, perhaps erratic behaviors and suddenly scales them up to become the defining essential traits of an entire ethnic essence.
It systematically strips away individuality. The framework dictates that if a person from the majority commits a crime, they're just a bad person acting alone.
Right.
But if a person from the minority commits a crime, their entire culture is put on trial. And this framing is so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that it dictates not just how we view crime or integration, but how we categorize the really mundane aspects of daily life, too.
Like what?
It dictates what we consider modern versus what we consider traditional.
Oh, the food analogy from the text. This makes it incredibly concrete. Think about the basic act of going out to dinner, right? If you go to a Turkish or a Pakistani restaurant that is widely categorized as eating ethnic food.
Right, you hear that phrase all the time.
But if you go to an Italian or a French restaurant, nobody refers to that as eating ethnic. The author points out that Italian and French cultures are coded as part of the modern Western world, whereas Turkish or Pakistani cultures are coded as traditional or the other.
Exactly.
The culinary experience itself is filtered through the us versus them binary.
And the analogy exposes how arbitrary and constructed the category of ethnic really is. It has nothing to do with geography or the presence of a distinct culture, and everything to do with invisible societal boundaries.
It's all about the boundaries.
Furthermore, Yilmaz's analysis points out how political figures across the entire spectrum, both left and right, utilize this underlying framework to shift blame for broader societal frustrations.
They were actively leveraging terms like political correctness to shut down critiques of the framework itself.
Yes, the political rhetoric relied entirely on the us versus them binary to function.
And I should say here, just to be super clear, we are impartially reporting the author's analysis of this political rhetoric. We're not taking a political stance or endorsing one side over the other here. We're just looking at how the mechanics of the rhetoric operated in the text.
Definitely. It's about observing the structure, not picking a side. The value here is learning to spot the framework in real time.
Yeah. So to you, the listener, the next time you watch a news broadcast tonight, the question isn't just whether the reporting is accurate. It's rather, what is the invisible frame placed around the events?
Are you looking at the news or are you looking at the green sunglasses?
Exactly. And identifying that traditional media constructed this us versus them frame is crucial because that frame didn't just disappear when the internet arrived.
No, it certainly did not. It was simply uploaded.
And if traditional media built the frame, social media basically became the megaphone that amplifies it to a deafening volume, which perfectly transitions us to the essay by Michael Bang Petersen.
Yes, professor of political science at Aarhus University. This was written for the Magtudningen 2.0, which is the comprehensive study of power and democracy in Denmark.
It's a huge study. And Petersen begins by establishing the sheer scale of the shift in how we consume information. The statistics he provides are vital for understanding the scope of this issue.
They really are. Do you have the numbers handy?
I do. So 68% of the population now gets their weekly political news from social media.
That is a staggering majority.
And for younger demographics, it has become their primary and sometimes their only source of political information.
Right, so if the traditional media's us versus them frame was influential when it was confined to a 30-minute evening broadcast, it is now supercharged. It's running 24 hours a day, right in our pockets.
But what's really fascinating here is that Petersen tackles a massive societal misconception about why social media feels so inherently toxic.
This was my favorite part of the paper, because the prevailing narrative, the one repeated ad nauseum by tech critics and sociologists, is that social media has destroyed public discourse because its algorithms trap us in echo chambers.
Right. The theory is that the platforms only show us content we already agree with, shielding us from dissenting opinions and polarizing us further and further until we can no longer communicate with the other side.
Everyone says that, but Petersen's research actually shatters this myth completely.
He argues that social media is not primarily an echo chamber at all. In fact, he points out that our offline physical lives are the real echo chambers.
And from a sociological standpoint, it is entirely logical when you think about it. Consider the physical structure of your everyday life. You generally associate with people who have similar educational backgrounds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You work with people in similar professions. You live in a neighborhood with people in a similar socioeconomic bracket. Your offline life is naturally highly curated to minimize friction.
It's curated by default.
Exactly. So social media, despite the algorithmic sorting we all worry about, actually exposes the average user to significantly more diversity of thought, political ideology, and direct disagreement than they would ever encounter on a normal Tuesday in the physical world.
That is wild. But wait, if social media is actually exposing us to a broader diversity of viewpoints, why does it feel like a constant hostile war zone?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, why do 88% of Danes report having witnessed hateful comments online? If the echo chamber isn't the mechanism driving everyone crazy, what is the actual cause of the toxicity?
To understand the toxicity, Petersen's research demands we look at who is actually generating the content. And this leads to what the data reveals as a startling Pareto distribution of hostility.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This goes back to that counterintuitive fact we mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Yes, the 1% rule.
When researchers analyzed users on the platform formerly known as Twitter, they found that a mere 10% of the users create 90% of all the posts.
So 10% are doing almost all the talking.
Right. The vast majority of people are simply lurking, reading, or occasionally liking a post. A tiny minority is dominating the airspace.
But the data becomes even more concentrated when you isolate for hostility. Of that highly active 10% who create the content, It is only 10% of them who are responsible for 90% of the hostile, hateful messages.
Which means a microscopic 1% of the total user base is responsible for almost all the hostility we see online.
It's almost hard to believe.
It is. The narrative that normal, polite people are logging onto Facebook, getting radicalized by an algorithm, and suddenly turning into evil trolls is statistically false.
Completely false. The internet isn't creating the hostility out of thin air. It is merely providing an unprecedented platform for a very specific, very small demographic.
And who are these people?
Well, Petersen highlights psychological research showing that these super spreaders of hostility possess measurable antisocial personality traits.
Ah.
They are the exact same individuals who exhibit hostility in offline, face-to-face political debates. Furthermore, these highly hostile users are statistically overrepresented in physical criminal records.
Wow. So the person screaming abuse in the comments section isn't a mild-mannered accountant who just had a bad day. It is someone who already possesses antisocial, aggressive tendencies in the physical world.
Right. The digital environment simply removes the physical consequences of that aggression. They are predisposed to this behavior.
But this reality forces a really crucial question regarding the invisible framework of the platforms themselves. If it is only 1% of the population generating this hostility, why does the algorithm seem to disproportionately serve it into our feeds?
Why does it feel so ubiquitous, right?
Exactly. Why does it feel like everyone is angry?
Petersen explains this through the rubbernecking phenomenon. The text compares it to gigakur, which is the Danish term for the traffic jams that occur on the highway. Not because there's an accident in your lane, but because everyone instinctively slows down to stare at the accident in the opposite lane.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Evolutionary psychology confirms this, right? Human beings have a deep-seated negativity bias.
We absolutely do.
We are biologically wired to pay close attention to conflict, threats, and negative information. Because from a survival standpoint, ignoring a threat is far more dangerous than ignoring a positive event.
Right. If you ignore a tiger, you die. If you ignore a beautiful sunset, you're fine.
Exactly. So the algorithms designed by social media companies are not necessarily operating with a malicious master plan to polarize society. They are simply optimization engines designed with one metric in mind: maximizing human attention and time on the platform.
The algorithm is completely agnostic to the moral quality of the content.
It doesn't care if it's good or bad.
Not at all. It monitors user behavior. It sees us slow down our scrolling to read a vicious argument in the comments, and it calculates, oh, this content retains attention. Serve more of this.
It rewards and amplifies the hostility of the 1% because the biology of the 99% compels us to look at the car crash.
That's beautifully put. The algorithm is just a mirror reflecting our own evolutionary vulnerabilities back at us.
That is so bleak, honestly. And the consequence of this algorithmic amplification is a profound democratic tragedy. Because the digital environment feels so overwhelmingly toxic, Petersen notes that 64% of Danes express a desire to withdraw from online political debate entirely.
And that is the real danger. The quiet majority is being actively bullied out of the modern democratic public square by a 1% minority of antisocial superspreaders, aided by an algorithm that just profits from the spectacle.
It is an invisible framework of hostility that literally dictates who feels safe enough to participate in civic life.
So we have traditional media framing our fundamental understanding of us versus them, and we have social media algorithms amplifying the most aggressive fringe of the population, driving the vast majority into silence.
It presents a stark, almost suffocating picture of the modern information landscape.
It does. Which brings us to the necessary pivot in our exploration today.
Yes, definitely. With external media putting us in ideological boxes and social media driving us away from public discourse, where do we actually find solid ground? How do we navigate a landscape that is designed to either categorize us or enrage us?
We turn to the pursuit of trusted knowledge, and perhaps more surprisingly, to the science of human creativity.
Which leads us to the catalog from Universität, the University Extension Program. And specifically, there's this introductory essay by Professor Anja Beckman.
She articulates the current zeitgeist so well. She notes that we are rapidly entering an era defined by artificial intelligence and synthetic content.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to know what's real.
Exactly. In a landscape where it is increasingly difficult to distinguish reality from algorithmic hallucinations designed to harvest attention, the need for verified information becomes paramount.
She calls for the establishment of lighthouses of trusted knowledge amidst this wild sea of information, and she specifically highlights the Lex project, Denmark's national lexicon.
Lex is such an incredible resource.
It really is. It is essentially a modern digital bastion of factual reality. It comprises nearly 250,000 articles that are actively curated, reviewed, and updated by a network of over 900 researchers.
It is a massive, deliberate initiative to ensure the existence of a baseline of quality-assured knowledge that is not beholden to attention metrics or the whims of a social media algorithm.
Right. Lex represents a structural antidote to the 1% of superspreaders we were just talking about. It is a return to foundational, vetted information.
And just examining the Folk Universa catalog itself provides a fascinating counter-narrative to the idea that society only wants fast, enraging content.
Oh, absolutely. The catalog is a testament to a deep, underlying public hunger for complex reality. I mean, look at what they're offering. They are offering rigorous courses on the political philosophy of Hannah Arendt, the intricate architecture of global cybersecurity, the geopolitical shifts driving Chinese global power, and even the opaque hidden mechanisms of international tax havens.
People possess a genuine desire to understand the architecture of the world around them. They don't just want to be angry online.
Right. Facts and trusted knowledge provide the anchor. But the catalog also features an interview with Professor Lean Tangard on the science of creativity, which explores how we actually build something new upon that factual foundation.
And Tanger's insights are so vital because she systematically demystifies the concept of creativity.
Yes.
Culturally, we tend to view creativity as this, magical, ethereal trait, a sudden lightning strike of genius that belongs only to the chosen few.
Like you're either born with it or you aren't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Tangard argues the absolute opposite. She posits that creativity is fundamentally a craft. It requires modesty, a remarkably high tolerance for resistance and rejection, and crucially, a deep, comprehensive knowledge of a specific subject.
Okay, I have to say, I found a fascinating tension in this part of the text, specifically regarding a quote she brings up from Pippi Longstocking.
Oh, I love this part.
It's so good. Pippi famously declares, "I haven't tried this before, so I'm probably good at it."
It's iconic.
It is. That quote embodies the ultimate mantra of jumping into the unknown with total, blind confidence. But Tangard is simultaneously arguing that you need to know your craft deeply to be truly creative.
Right.
So how do we reconcile the requirement of deep foundational knowledge with Pippi's philosophy of blind, inexperienced confidence? It seems like a fundamental contradiction to me.
It definitely appears paradoxical at first glance, but it is actually a profound synthesis. Tangard is suggesting that to genuinely innovate, to push past the boundaries of the established framework, you must first know exactly where the walls of that framework are located.
Ah, I see.
The most creative individuals understand their field so intimately that they can instantly differentiate between genuine innovation and a mere rehash of existing ideas. The Pippi Longstocking confidence, that bold, seemingly reckless leap into the unknown, is actually earned through the rigorous acquisition of foundational knowledge.
So mastery of the craft provides the psychological safety net required to take the creative leap.
Exactly. You have to master the rules before you can effectively break them.
That makes total sense. But Tangard issues a pretty severe warning about how modern institutional structures are actively hostile to this exact type of creative process.
She does. She identifies the invisible framework strangling innovation as the Molavej ideology, the measure and weigh ideology.
Measure and weigh ideology. Break that down for us.
It describes a cultural shift, particularly prevalent in education, research, and corporate management, where value is strictly equated with quantifiability.
If you can't measure it, it doesn't matter.
Right. We have developed a system that only recognizes what can be neatly inputted into a spreadsheet. We test, we measure, we optimize for predictable metrics. The inherent problem is that true creativity, by its very nature, often produces nonlinear, unpredictable results.
Results that cannot be immediately quantified or neatly categorized by existing metrics.
Precisely. And if the result doesn't fit in the designated cell in the spreadsheet, the system treats it as though it doesn't exist. She provides two compelling examples of how this ideology limits human potential.
The first one is about Jens Christian Skou, right?
Yes. He was a Danish doctor who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1997. After receiving the highest honor in science, Skou observed that he would likely never have won the prize had he been forced to operate under the rigid, hyper-measured funding and productivity metrics of today's academic environment.
That is a terrifying thought. The very bureaucratic systems we constructed to ensure efficiency and productivity would have literally suffocated a Nobel Prize-winning discovery.
It illustrates perfectly how a framework designed for optimization can become a straitjacket for innovation.
Yeah. And her second example shifts from the highest levels of academia to the foundational level of primary education. She highlights the NEST project at Katrina Bergskolen in Aarhus.
This is such a cool initiative.
It really is. The NEST project is a radical departure from traditional educational models. It is an initiative where children with autism and children without autism are integrated and taught in the exact same classroom environment.
Which completely defies standard administrative logic.
Right. The conventional framework dictates that to maximize efficiency and tailor instruction, students must be separated, categorized, and placed into specific tracks based on their diagnoses and tested capabilities.
But the leadership at this school actively chose to ignore the dictates of the measure and weigh ideology. They prioritized human integration over logistical categorization.
And the outcome of ignoring that framework is that the project is highly successful. It works so well that parents of neurotypical children are actively fighting to get their kids enrolled in these inclusive classrooms because the environment fosters a superior learning experience for everyone.
But Taggart points out the critical catch here.
Which is
The nuanced, holistic benefits of this deep human integration, like the development of empathy, the diverse problem-solving dynamics, none of that can be easily quantified by standardized testing.
Oh, I see. So if the school district only evaluates the success of the NEST project by looking at a spreadsheet of test scores, they will completely miss the profound magic of what is actually occurring in that room.
Exactly. The framework of measurement literally blinds the institution to actual human success.
Wow. Okay, so we've explored how traditional media constructs ideological boxes to categorize society. We've examined how social media algorithms trap our attention within boxes of hostility. And we've seen how bureaucratic spreadsheets stifle our creativity by forcing human endeavor into numerical boxes.
We've covered a lot of boxes.
We really have. But what happens when the invisible framework limiting your reality isn't an external societal structure at all? What happens when the box trapping you is constructed by your own mind?
This brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most intimate dimension of our deep dive today. We are shifting from sociology and media studies to the architecture of the human nervous system.
We are looking at the course materials from Skolen for Hellingskunst, the School of Healing Arts, and these specific modules are taught by Nicholas Grain. He's an integrative psychotherapist with over 21 years of clinical experience.
His methodology is fascinating because it draws upon a highly diverse array of modalities. He synthesizes EMDR, Jungian therapy, and Ken Wilber's integral psychology to approach the mind.
And Thrain begins by establishing a definition of trauma that fundamentally shifts our common understanding. Culturally, we tend to define a trauma by the external event.
Right, we point to the car crash, the physical abuse, the sudden loss, and we say, that was the trauma.
But the text explicitly redefines this. It states, a trauma is not what happened in a specific situation, but the imprint that arose in the mind as a consequence.
That distinction is vital for healing. The trauma is not the external event itself. The event is over and in the past. The trauma is the internal framework that your nervous system constructed in order to survive the event.
It is an invisible neurological architecture built for protection in a moment of extreme distress.
Exactly. But it continues to dictate your emotional and physiological reactions in the present day, long after the threat has passed.
So how does a therapist even begin to dismantle a framework that the client cannot see, a framework that is literally woven into the fabric of their own mind?
It's incredibly complex. But Thrain's course outlines several specific therapeutic techniques designed to navigate this internal landscape. The first crucial step is identifying, then Rudertrod, the red thread.
The red thread, what is that exactly?
The concept of the red thread is essentially a process of complex psychological mapping. You see, a client rarely enters therapy with a clear understanding of their internal framework. They arrive with a tangled, chaotic mess of present-day symptoms.
Like what?
Perhaps chronic addiction, repeating patterns of relationship sabotage, or inexplicable explosive anger. The therapist's primary task is to carefully trace the red thread backward through the fog of these symptoms to locate the underlying, interconnected trauma network.
It's like a delicate process of uncovering the unconscious attachment contracts the client formed to survive. You can't just dive directly into the deepest, most painful wound on day one.
No, absolutely not. You have to figure out the exact right sequence to process the memories, much like carefully cutting the wires to defuse a bomb.
Right. If you snip the wrong wire or move too quickly, The entire nervous system shuts down in defense.
Precisely. Once the map is established, one of those most profound modalities they utilize to engage with the trauma network is called parts work.
Parts work relies on the understanding that the human mind is not a single monolithic entity, right? It is composed of various parts, each with distinct roles and functions.
Yes. And when a person experiences something truly unbearable, an event that the mind simply lacks the capacity to process in that specific moment, these different parts of the mind rally to protect the core self.
And the text describes these protective parts creating what they call time pockets.
Time pockets, yes. When the nervous system is overwhelmed, parts of the mind encapsulate the unbearable memory, the terror, and the pain, effectively freezing it in time. It shields the individual from complete psychological collapse.
So a fragment of the client's consciousness is literally stuck in the past, holding on to this highly volatile emotional material in a sealed time pocket. Meanwhile, the rest of the personality attempts to continue functioning, going to work, living in the present.
Exactly. Parts work is the delicate process of gently approaching these frozen, silenced parts of the self and finally offering them a voice. When the therapist helps the client allow these parts to speak, to express the terror they've been holding on to for years or decades, the time pocket opens.
In processing that stored emotion releases massive amounts of trapped life energy that the nervous system was previously expending just to keep the pocket sealed shut.
However, accessing those time pockets safely requires bypassing the brain's natural immediate defense mechanisms. To achieve this, therapists utilize tools like bilateral stimulation, which is a core component of therapies like EMDR.
The text mentions bilateral stimulation, but let's break down the actual mechanics for a second. How does moving your eyes back and forth or holding vibrating buzzers allow a person to access a repressed traumatic memory without triggering a full-blown panic attack?
It operates on the theory of taxing the brain's working memory.
Okay, taxing working memory.
The brain has a limited capacity for conscious attention at any given moment. Bilateral stimulation involves occupying a percentage of that conscious attention with a steady, rhythmic sensory input in the present moment.
Such as tracking a therapist's moving finger with your eyes or feeling alternating vibrations in your hands.
Yes, by forcing the brain to continuously process this bilateral sensory task, you are artificially consuming a significant portion of its processing power.
Ah. So when the therapist asks the client to recall the traumatic memory simultaneously, the brain literally lacks the cognitive bandwidth to experience the full, overwhelming emotional weight of the memory.
Exactly. It creates a neurological buffer, a safe distance. The bilateral task anchors one foot firmly in the safety of the present room, allowing the other foot to step into the time pocket.
Because the memory is recalled without the accompanying physiological panic, the brain is forced to process and store the memory in a new, less emotionally charged format.
It is a remarkable neurological hack to bypass the invisible framework of fear.
It really is. But I deeply appreciate that Thoraine's course materials do not romanticize this process at all. Healing is not portrayed as merely sitting in a chair, having a profound psychological epiphany, and walking out cured.
No, not at all. Thorane heavily emphasizes that therapists must equip their clients with concrete practical tools to handle the very real fallout of this work between sessions.
Because dismantling an internal framework has severe physical consequences, right? The mind and the body are intrinsically linked.
They are. When a time pocket is finally opened and decades of repressed emotion are released, the client is highly likely to experience intense physiological reactions.
They might suffer from severe insomnia, sudden and inexplicable outbursts of anger, waves of overwhelming grief,
Or even acute physical pain and migraines as the nervous system attempts to recalibrate.
The healing process is so visceral. The therapist is responsible for arming the client with grounding techniques to find inner peace and equilibrium when they are entirely alone at 2 in the morning and their nervous system is suddenly panicking because the old protective walls are coming down.
It takes the highly abstract theories of Jungian psychology and grounds them directly in the grit and reality of daily physical survival.
So if we step back and synthesize the sheer scope of what we've covered today, we have taken a massive journey through the varied structures that define human reality.
We really have. We started by examining the external societal structures with Faru Yilmaz, exposing how traditional news media constructs an invisible us versus them frame.
We saw how language and framing categorize complex human beings into essentialized blocks, hiding profound bias behind the guise of journalistic objectivity.
And from there, we analyzed the digital magnification of those structures with Bang Petersen. We discovered that the perception of universal online hatred is actually a distortion.
Right. It's driven by a tiny 1% of antisocial individuals exploiting our evolutionary negativity bias, while the algorithmic framework silently profits from the resulting democratic withdrawal.
Then we sought refuge in the Folk Universität catalog. Lingtangard demonstrated that breaking out of the stifling, spreadsheet-driven measurement culture requires mastering our craft deeply enough to earn the confidence to leap into the unknown.
Basically, ignoring the framework of the metric.
Exactly. And ultimately, we arrived at the most fundamental structure of all with Nicholas Thrain, the architecture of our own trauma.
We realize that the invisible walls holding us back are often protective time pockets created by our own minds, and that true healing requires mapping the red thread to gently dismantle them.
The core takeaway from all of these sources is that knowledge only becomes power when it is understood and applied. Recognizing these structures is the essential first step to reclaiming your agency.
Yes. If you can see the media's framing, you can critically evaluate the premise of the debate. If you recognize the algorithmic amplification of the 1%, you can consciously refuse to surrender your attention to the hostility.
And if you spot the bureaucratic spreadsheet suffocating your idea, you can choose to validate your own creative intuition.
And finally, if you can acknowledge the existence of the protective time pockets within your own mind, you can begin the brave, difficult work of navigating them.
Which is really beautiful when you think about it.
It is. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We always want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over long after the audio stops.
Yes, something to reflect on.
We have spent this time discussing how society puts us in demographic boxes, how algorithms trap our attention in cycles of outrage, and how our own nervous systems build intricate walls to protect us from pain. So, as you move through the rest of your day, ask yourself, if our media frames our culture, if the algorithms frame our anger, and if the spreadsheets frame our creativity, what part of your daily thoughts are actually entirely yours? And if you could provide a voice to just one silenced part of your own mind today, what would it finally say?
Thank you so much for taking this journey with us.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.